Alright, so hi. I was just saying I love you to my spouse. Wonderful thing to start off the lecture with, right? I'm Dr. Black. I'm teaching your humanities class. And as a reminder, you're seeing me via video rather than live in person because this is the first week of class still and I am indisposed and unable to join you for the first week of class. I will be back in person next week and I'll be happy to see you all. I don't know, I haven't met you yet. It's the kind of thing you say to be polite, but maybe I'm not going to like you. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to love you all. This is Phaedra, our tiny kitten, who is a destructive little bundle of love. We adore her, and she's constantly going places she shouldn't be, like trying to climb into the trash can for no obvious reason. Anyway, there you go. Settle in, babe. Alright, so this is the first full lecture you're going to get for the humanities class, for Humanities 1. And it is on prehistory, which is kind of an anomaly because we're going to spend the rest of this class covering about 5,000 years worth of history, from roughly 3,500 BCE up to about 1,500 CE. So about 5,000 years of history. Whereas this first lecture, this one lecture out of the whole semester, we're going to talk about, depending on how you look at it, either about 2 million years of history or about 300,000. And why we're doing a huge amount of history in one, or a huge amount of stuff in one lecture and then zooming in so that the next 31 lectures are just over 5,000 years, I'll tell you, but it does seem odd at the outset. Alright. So, the class, as you may have surmised from the name, is about the humanities. And in particular, what that means is it's about the artifacts, I guess, if you will, the cultural and intellectual products of humanity. Religion, politics, philosophy, music, art, things like that. It's not a history class, strictly speaking, because we're not focusing completely on just the events that occurred. You need to know them and talk about them in order to contextualize what we're going to be discussing. But what we are interested in is not necessarily the stuff that happened so much as what the people who lived thought and said and wrote and arted about the stuff that happened. We want to explore the inner lives of the people that lived in ancient Mesopotamia, in ancient Egypt, in ancient and classical Greece, and blah, 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 and so on and so on. We're studying the humanities. In other words, we are studying humanity, the humane elements of history. Not necessarily the physical events, not the chronology as such, but the humane aspects, the parts that constitute the lived experience of these times. Makes it sound all highfalutin for a required first year class, huh? Anyway. Okay. So here's the deal, though. The best way to try to get into the heads and hearts of these people that lived in the past is through their writing. Now, their writing isn't going to be all that we look at. We're going to look at their art and their architecture and their music and a bunch of other stuff. But we have to use the things that they wrote as our guide star, as we try to interpret all of this stuff. When we talk about their religion, we're talking about, when we talk about the religion of the ancient Mesopotamians, we're talking about what they thought about the universe, how they thought it operated, and what they thought their place in it was. That's significant. And we're not going to be trying to guess at it. We have literally their writings where they talk about how they think the universe works, what they think their place in it is. Like, they talk about this stuff. So we can talk about it in a very authoritative and definitive fashion. Humans, prior to 5,000 years ago, or, well, yeah, about 5,000 years ago, still had, they still made art, they still had thoughts about how the world worked and what the meaning of life was. They had all this stuff. The problem is, prior to the beginning of the Bronze Age, around 3500 BCE, depending on where you are, but roughly, prior to the beginning of the Bronze Age, there wasn't any writing. Which means that prior to the beginning of the Bronze Age, we don't have any very authoritative ways of getting into the minds of the people that live. Because, as I'm going to talk about in a moment, humans are around way before they started writing things down. And they definitely engaged in these sorts of humane pursuits of creating art, of doing philosophy and religion and things like that. They definitely did all that stuff. But there's only so much that we can say about what the humans were like then, and what their lived experience was like. There's only so much we can say about it through guesses that we make by examining the artifacts they left behind and some of the art they left behind. Without writing, we can't really get into their heads and their hearts. We don't really understand them. Not really. So that's why I'm only going to spend one class session talking about the humans that lived before writing, even though this is a class about the human experience, fundamentally. It's humanities. It's about the human experience. And I want to talk about that, but we can mostly, usefully talk about that once humans have writing, and once we can get access to their thoughts. Direct access to their thoughts. Before writing, it's just not as, there's just not as much to go on. There's not as much, and there's certain crucial things missing. So, these people were still valuable, and they still had rich inner lives. I'm sure they did, because anatomically they were us. I'll tell you about that in a second. They weren't different than us physically, for the most part. So, there's no reason to assume that they didn't have rich inner lives the way that at least some of us do. But there was no writing. We can't get direct access to those rich inner lives, so we can't talk about them in the same way we talk about humans after writing. So, yeah, they're not less important because we're only spending one class on them. They didn't give us what we needed to spend another 15 weeks on them in this context. If this were an archaeology class, sure, awesome. But it's not. So, okay, so that's the setup. That's why we're doing prehistory in one class, and then we're doing a portion of history in the rest of it. Okay. So, alright, let's talk about the prehistory then. If we're talking about humans, it's kind of a, like, it's hard to nail down exactly what we mean by that. But if we're talking about people, what do we mean by that? Well, so here's the deal. If we mean humanoid creatures that use tools and, lived in societies that were at least kind of like ours and probably communicated with something resembling language, we can go all the way back to Australopithecus, which if I were in class, I would write down on the board so you can not just spell it, but I'm not gonna, so I can't. Australopithecus, a precursor humanoid to Homo sapiens. That's us. Homo sapiens is us. A precursor to Homo sapiens and genus Homo in general. And they go back over 4 million years. 4 million years! It's a while ago. Genus Homo, a subdivision of humanoids, developed out of Australopithecus about 2 million years ago. 2 million years. 2 million years. And they were much more like us. They weren't exactly like us, but they were very, very similar. You could take a lot of them and stick them in board shorts and Hawaiian shirt and, send them off down to like the Gulf Coast for spring break, and you might not know the difference. It's hard to tell. But if we want to talk about humans, Homo sapiens, that's us, literally humans, and that's 300,000 years ago, or thereabouts, when we get Homo sapiens. And let me be clear. If you're thinking about cavemen with, like, jaws that jut out and sloping foreheads and stuff like that, you're talking about pre-Homo sapiens. Other members of genus Homo. So that's like the 2 million years ago and then after. When we get to Homo sapiens, humans, I'm talking about people that are us. Like, they may not have been as tall as we are because of, differences in protein intake in their youth, and they may not have, like, cool haircuts like we do. And they definitely probably didn't wear glasses. But they didn't have sarcastic t-shirts. But they were us. You clean up a Homo sapiens, a member of genus species Homo sapiens from 300,000 years ago. You clean them up, stick them in some modern clothes. You might think they're a little short, but you would never not recognize them as human, because that's what they were. They're human. They're us. They're us. Anatomically, modern humans. 300,000 years. Holy poo. And we're only going to talk about the last 5,000 years. Come on. Come on. I'll tell you, I'm going to get into that. 300,000 years. Homo sapiens. We know they were like us because we have found evidence. Again, we don't have writing because they didn't have it. But we do have clues that they have left us. That they were like us. That they have the same kind of inner life and thoughts and hopes and dreams and so forth as us. The first clue, of course, is just that anatomically they are us. The same brains, the same everything, so why wouldn't they have had that stuff? They certainly would have. But they also left us art. The cave paintings, I believe the book mentions Lascaux cave paintings. Let's see here. There's that. Yeah, the Lascaux cave paintings, which are relatively recent. 16,000 years old. These are complicated, elaborate, lovely paintings in a cave in France. That's why it's called Lascaux, and spelled funny. Um, um, there are other things, though. I mean, we can see from that clearly they wanted to create art. Yeah, some people say maybe there's a ritual purpose. They're trying to appease the gods. Maybe they just liked art. Have you ever Googled something in the margins of your notebook just because you weren't trying to signal the gods? You were just Googling. Like, you're stuck in a cave for a good portion of the winter. Why not? Right? Why not decorate it? There's the Cave of the Hands in Argentina. The Cave of the Hands has handprints of early humans, going back roughly to the beginning of right around when agriculture was starting. So well before writing. But they had handprints. They would take pigment and stuff it into a little bone tube and put their hand on the wall and then blow the pigment onto the wall, creating a negative imprint of their hand. Why did they do it? Why not? Have you ever seen a handprint in concrete? Why did someone do that? Why? To let you know they were there. Thousands of years ago. Humans. Not Neanderthals, not grunting, slope forehead, jaw jugging beasts, but humans in a cave in Argentina put their hands on the wall and left a mark there that has lasted for 10,000 years. Just say hi. I was here. I lived on this earth and I existed and I was here. It's amazing. One of my favorite examples is the Hohlefels flute. 40,000 years old. 40,000 years old. There was a cave in Germany called Hohlefels. Hohle, Hohlefels, F-E-L-S. Hohlefels Cave. Which, by the way, the Germans are terrible at naming things. Hohle just means hole, Fels means rock. Literally, this is Rock Hole Cave. I don't know what to tell you. It's the Germans. I got nothing there. I love their food. I love Germany. It's a beautiful, clean, polite country with lovely forests and mountains. And like I said, great food, sausage, cheese, just great stuff they got in Germany. But sweet Jesus, they named a cave Rock Hole. What do you do with that? Where do you go with that? Thank you, Germany. Hohlefels Cave. They excavated it and they found a fossilized flute. They thought it was just a bone at first, a bird bone, because it was a bird bone. Bird bones are hollow, of course. No spoilers. It was a long bone from a bird's leg, maybe, or wing. And it had been cleaned out and shaped so that it had a mouthpiece and several regularly spaced holes. This was obviously not an accident, and it could only have one purpose, to be played as a musical instrument. The flute was fossilized, of course, but they were able to do like a scan of some sort. I don't really understand all the technology archaeologists use. They were able to do a scan of some sort, and they built a computer model of it And then they 3D printed a replica of the flute. And you can go online on like YouTube and stuff, and you can find videos of where they went into the cave. They went into the cave where they found it and played the flute and recorded what it sounded like resonating in that cave. Exactly the sound that humans, not cartoon cavemen, but humans, 40,000 years ago would have heard that sound. Maybe they were grateful for it. Maybe some member of their tribe shake that flute for just days like that. Why were they in the cave? I'm going to talk about that later, but probably due to weather. Just not really safe to go out. Not really comfortable to go out. So they were stuck inside, and maybe one of them had made the flute to entertain them. Maybe they loved hearing it. Maybe it was a member of the tribe that annoyed the holy hell out of them. And he pulled that flute, and they're all like, oh, son of a... Damn it. I don't know. Somebody left it behind. It was lost. 40,000 years ago. Borg humans stuck in a cave during bad weather, screwed around on a musical instrument. Sounds pretty human, doesn't it? Sounds just so unbelievably human. 40,000 years ago. So we get hints that they were like us. These tantalizing hints that they were like us. But we can't know directly what they were thinking, what they believed, because they didn't write anything. There was no writing. Nowhere on the planet was there writing. So it's hard. It's hard to go any further with that. We can get little glimpses of what was going on with them, but we can't go any further. It's frustrating. We can say some things about how they lived. What they thought about it, we don't know as much. We can say some things about how they lived. And this will illuminate why they were stuck in the cave. So let's talk about that. For the vast majority of human history, and even before human history into the Genghis Homo, and even Australopithecus, but definitely for all of human history, excepting the last 5,000 years or so, 10,000 years or so, humans were hunter-gatherers. Now, there's a lot of truth in advertising in the name. We'll talk about that in a second. One thing I want to clear up right away is you have maybe been fed some false information about hunting and gathering in junior high or high school science classes, where they would have told you men get the hunting and women get the gathering. That's horse poop. Hunter-gatherer societies, except in the very, very late stages where some very complicated hunting techniques were introduced. Generally speaking, the things they hunted were small game, squirrels, rabbits, shit like that, birds, and the things that they gathered were things that everybody could gather. There was absolutely no circumstance in which a guy was going to not gather something if he saw it, not grab some fruit if he saw it, and absolutely no circumstances under which a woman was not going to throw a rock at a bird if she had an opportunity to take it down. You know, that was just going to be the way it was. Hunter-gatherers were egalitarian societies. Okay, so what was hunting and gathering like? So, 300,000 years, minus a little bit on the end. Humans were hunter-gatherers. What does that mean? Well, it means that what they had to do was continually be on the move, trying to get their calories. That's not how they thought about it. They didn't know what a calorie was. They weren't on the keto diet. Nothing like that. They didn't know what a calorie was, but that's what they were doing. They were just trying to keep body and spirit joined, if you will, by moving around, trying to get enough sustenance, enough stuff to keep them going for another day. The movement was not random. Hunter-gatherers moved in groups, smallish groups, 20 to 30 people. They moved in groups for mutual protection and also mutual aid. They moved in these groups, and they would move in a sort of pattern that corresponded to the year, the way that the year ran. Lore passed down from elders of the tribe would have told them where certain groves of trees or groups of bushes were, and when they would be bearing fruit that could be eaten. And a hunter-gatherer tribe would move to one area where they could get a fairly reliable source of food, of fruit, fruit-bearing trees or nut-bearing trees or what have you, or fruit-bearing bushes. And they would get this stuff, and they would eat it, and they would stay there for a little while, a few days maybe a week or two. They would stay there. They would hunt opportunistically. Maybe during the day they would send out some hunters who would see if they found anything. If they did, that's less of the fruit or nuts or whatever that they had to consume to stay alive for another day. If they didn't, oh well, that they had the fruit and the nuts. And then when all of the fruit and nuts or whatever was growing there had been exhausted, they would move on to the next source of food that they knew was fairly reliable. And they could do this throughout the growing season as different plants would start to bear whatever nutritious things they would bear. They could intersperse, like I said, opportunistic hunting, and make note of anything growing, large groups of growing things that could feed them that they hadn't been aware of before. And then, as it got toward winter, they could find a place, as the weather got worse, they would try to find a place that they could hole up for longer periods of time. They might try to grab as much food as they could that might keep for a little while, because it's not like they had preservation techniques. They might try to grab a little bit of food that they could keep for a while, but mostly they would just try to survive on hunting what they could during the winter, because it's not like they were going to get anything from fruit-bearing trees or anything like that. So it would be really lean during the winter. It would be really difficult. Okay. So this does not sound like a great existence. I'm not into hiking, but I feel like even if you were, not super fun. Why only 20 or 30 people? Well, in anthropology, there's a concept called carrying capacity. And in anthropology, what carrying capacity means is the number of people that a given terrain and climate can support using a given mode of subsistence. That is to say, way of getting food. So hunting and gathering is a mode of subsistence. It is a way of getting food. Temperate plains, temperate forests, those are terrains. For most temperate terrains and climate, climate, temperate is the climate, forest, plains, what have you, that's the terrain. For most temperate terrains, hunting and gathering as a mode of subsistence yields a carrying capacity of about one person per square mile. Not a lot. You might notice that the population density of Tulsa is a bit greater than 1 person per square mile. That means we have a mode of subsistence, a way of getting food that can sustain more than 1 person per square mile, that has a higher carrying capacity in this terrain and climate. Hunting and gathering, 1 person per square mile. That means that for a sizable area, like an area larger than the Tulsa metro, you could not have a whole lot of people living there. You couldn't have more than 20 or 30 people living in that whole area because they needed to be able to move, to roam this entire area unimpeded without running into any competition in order to get all of the food that they needed to get to keep that group alive for a whole year. They wouldn't be using all of it at once. They're not all spread out. They're clumped together. But they will be moving through this terrain over the course of a year, getting all the stuff they need. Okay. 1 person per square mile. Carrying capacity. Hunting and gathering. Key words. A couple of things about the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. First of all, if you are constantly on the move, you're not going to be having a bunch of stuff. I own a bunch of stuff. Way too much stuff. More stuff than is healthy. Sorry. A lot of books, a lot of movies. Yes, I'm old enough that we still own movies. Not relying on streaming services. It's smart too. We're smart. They're taking stuff off the streaming services. You watch, or rather don't watch. Haha. Made a little joke there. I have a lot of stuff. There's no way I could carry it all. If you think about all the stuff you own, even if you don't own much stuff, you definitely probably could not carry all of it. So imagine if you did not have a home, if you did not have a house, if you did not have a place to put your things because you were always on the move, because you and the 20 or 30 people that you live your whole life with have to move constantly throughout the year in an area bigger than the Tulsa metro area. Yeah, you don't have much stuff. You've got literally just what you can carry comfortably. Not just what you can carry comfortably. So hunter-gatherers didn't have a lot of stuff. They also didn't have a lot of different stuff. You're spending all your time with the same 20 or 30 people. You have occasional contacts with other tribes that you sort of brush up against. But that's about it. You all have more or less the same stuff. You've got maybe a stone tool for cutting and crushing food. You've got maybe a little selection of rocks that you can huck at small animals to stun them. You might have a spear with a stone tip, maybe. It's not like one person has $1 million and another person doesn't. You've all got the same stuff. And none of you have very much stuff. So there's no such thing as rich or poor. There's no economic stratification. Everybody's got the same stuff. There's no ability to store a bunch of stuff. To like bargain with later or get rich because you can't store food and you literally can't store anything else. You got nowhere to store it. You have no permanent home. So there's no economic stratification. There's no real social stratification either. Not much, anyway. Hunter-gatherer tribes may have an elder who is respected because they know a bunch of stuff. Like they know where the places to get food are. They know a bunch of tricks for dealing with, illness and stuff. Just because, through virtue of having lived a long time. They may have some strong people in the tribe who can fight if necessary. Fight off animals, or very rarely fight off another tribe. Hunter-gatherer tribes don't really engage in warfare. That's a whole other thing. I'll talk about that later. Um, there may be some people who have certain positions of respect in the tribe, but generally speaking, everybody has the same job. No one has time to specialize in anything. It's not like you got one person who doesn't do any hunting or gathering and just sits around learning medicine. Why? Because all of the food needs of that person would then have to be met by the rest of the tribe. You see? Everyone who isn't actively a hunter-gatherer is putting a burden on the other members of the tribe. And there's only 20 or 30 of them anyway. They can't really afford that. They're not just bursting with food. I mean, the same thing applies now. I don't grow my own food. The only reason I can be a professor, that is, the only reason I can do something that doesn't involve growing my own food, is because we are efficient enough at food production that we have enough people in our society who do produce food to make possible for the rest of us to not produce food. The fact that I don't grow my own food doesn't make me need to eat any less. I still need to eat just as much as I would if I were a farmer. More or less. So the fact that we can have in our society people who don't just grow food is a testament to how good at producing food we are. Because for every person that doesn't grow food, someone else has to take on the responsibility of seeing that that person gets fed. And in a hunter-gatherer society, food is precarious. Their mode of subsistence, their method of getting food, is very precarious. It does not produce a surplus of food, especially because you can't store it. And it's very chancy. A lot of days you're not getting enough food. Even with everybody trying real hard. So hunter-gatherer societies do not have, generally speaking, do not have people who aren't hunter-gatherers. It is known for a fact that some hunter-gatherer tribes had older people who probably weren't doing as much to bring in food. And of course they had babies who weren't producing food in their early years. So that's like a huge gamble, right? If you're a hunter-gatherer tribe and you have babies, you're making a real sacrifice. Everyone is providing food for the children. They didn't have high birth rates. They weren't just overrun with kids. Because if you have a bunch of kids, that means everybody else is working that much harder to produce the food. So there's no economic stratification because everyone has the same stuff. And there's also no, or virtually no, social stratification because everyone has the same job. And last, there's no gender stratification because men and women are basically doing the same stuff. If anything, women are considered a little more important in most hunter-gatherer societies because they can ensure the continued survival of the society. They can have the kids. Men can't do that. Alright. How do we know all this? Well, there's a lot of archaeological evidence, material culture they call it, where we examine the stuff they left behind and try to figure out what that must mean about their society. But there are also still some hunter-gatherer tribes, even using stone tools and stuff, that exist even today in the deep and remote places of the world. And we can sort of check our homework, if you will. We can look at the archaeological evidence and the conclusions we drew from that, and then, I say we as a guy who's involved in this, whatever. We can then compare that to the hunter-gatherer tribes that still exist today, and we see we're pretty much right. Now, there's probably some things that would have changed over the past, several 100,000 years, and modern hunter-gatherer tribes, ones that still exist now, are probably a little bit different from the ones that used to exist, but they seem fundamentally pretty damn similar. So hunting and gathering On the one hand, men and women are equal. Everyone has the same job. Nobody has more money than anybody else because nobody has any money at all, or other resources for that matter. But you live in a very small group. You're constantly struggling to get food. I mean, that's literally your job every day. What's your job? You wake up and your job is to get food. Nothing else. Yeah, sometimes you'll hit a really good spot and you'll have easy sources of food for a while, and you can be kind of lazy and play around, make up songs, do some cave paintings, whatever. Carve a flute. But you're not guaranteed to be able to do any of that. And that's all just stuff that's incidental. Hunting and gathering, not the best gig. Had some advantages, but not the best gig. Around 10,000 years ago, so that would be 8,000 BCE, thereabouts. The exact date would depend on where we're talking about. This is Elias. Elias is 3, thereabouts, 3-ish.
Sure.
He's a little older and a little more chill than Phaedra. He and Phaedra play a lot. They get along pretty well, but they can't share space just yet. They're not like that yet. I mean, they share space, but they don't cuddle together or anything. Come on, Elias, lay down. Lay down, buddy. Lay down. He's a sweet boy. Anyway, so around 10,000 years ago, give or take, depending on the exact area, because this is climate related, we see a climate shift where the last ice age starts to end, glaciers are retreating, there's a lot more carbon dioxide in the air, the earth is getting warmer and wetter. Well, a warmer, wetter earth with more carbon dioxide in the air sounds awful good for plants. Great time to grow shit. And that's where we see the beginnings of agriculture. Which, and I phrase it that way, the beginning of agriculture, and that's misleading. Because we have evidence that humans were attempting agriculture off and on for a long time before it finally started to take off. And when you think about it, it makes sense. Of course they were. Humans aren't stupid. Again, Homo sapiens, first Homo sapiens, 300,000 years ago. We're not talking about, like, cavemen. We're talking about people, just like us, except without as many piercings. Well, I mean, maybe. They were humans. They would have started to put together the concept that seeds from the fruit and other things that they ate, that when they discarded them in a trash pile or something, that the stuff would grow. Sometimes it would grow. They would have grasped the idea of seeds. They would have grasped the idea of trying to take some of the animals they hunted and keep them and breed them and domesticate them. They would have gotten the concept. And in fact, there was some success at domesticating certain food-bearing animals prior to the beginnings of agriculture proper. We call this pastoralism, where you aren't growing food, you aren't growing food-bearing plants on a large scale, but you do have some domesticated animals like herding. We call that pastoralism. It's kind of a midway step between hunting and gathering in agriculture. And it still persisted even after agriculture started in places where farming was not super sustainable. But anyway, humans would definitely have gotten the idea, and they attempted agricultural experiments off and on in various places around the world for a long time prior to 10,000 years ago. But around 10,000 years ago, like I said, the climate started to change, and that meant in some places around the world, you get some areas where, it's just going to be hard to fail. the agriculture thing is going to happen if you're even trying at all. And since humans were already, it starts to happen. And so in these places, we start to see humans settle down. They stop moving around. Why do they stop moving around? Duh. If they're growing plants in one place, they got to live in one place to grow the damn plants. But when they're doing that, you're now in one place. You're not moving around. What does that mean? Well, it means you can accumulate stuff. And if you're doing agriculture, you can accumulate food. Because the whole point of agriculture is to grow food, not just that can be eaten right then. You're growing it in large quantities so you can eat it for a while. You're developing techniques to keep the food, to store it in granaries, things like that. So you're growing large quantities of food, much larger than you're ever going to need. It takes longer than a day. You're not getting immediate gratification. You're not growing something. You're not like eating like immediately what you grow. So it takes time, but when you get the food, you get a lot of it. You can store a bunch of it. You can store stuff. Agriculture has a higher carrying capacity as a mode of subsistence in temperate zones. The carrying capacity is anywhere from 10 to 20 people per square mile. Now, why is that important? Here's why. Because, I don't know if you grew up around farms or anything, but if you have even a passing familiarity with farming, you know that it does not require 10 to 20 people to work a square mile of farm, even using the primitive technology that they had 10,000 years ago. That means that there are people in society who can be fed by the surplus of what the farmers are doing, freeing them up to spend all of their time doing other stuff. What were they doing? Well, maybe they were doing pottery, spending all their time getting really good at pottery. You've got the ability to do that now. You're not moving around all the time, so you can have equipment like a pottery wheel that you wouldn't have had because it's too big to carry, that you wouldn't have had as a hunter-gatherer. Maybe they are spending all their time learning how to fight and watching out for animals and protecting the granaries from people who want to come steal the grain. Maybe they're learning how to weave baskets or dye clothes or build granaries, for God's sakes. Maybe they're learning to watch the stars so they can figure out the best times to plant and harvest. Right? Agriculture means different jobs. And it also means you can have stuff and you can accumulate stuff. Not just food. You can have pots and baskets and useful tools and things like that. But guess what? If some people have stuff, other people won't. If some people have an important job like potter or weaver, other people won't. Other people don't have that skill. Not everyone's a potter. Not everyone's a weaver. So suddenly, with agriculture, we get social stratification and economic stratification. We get some people have more stuff than others, more resources they can use to bargain, and some people have more status in society than others. We also get the big bugaboo. Everywhere on the planet where humans have ever developed agriculture, this happens. We get patriarchy, gender stratification, men seizing power and instituting the power of men over women. Why? One explanation is just that it makes sense for men to do that, or at least it makes sense to them, in an agricultural society because of the economics of it. Anybody with kids will tell you that kids are a great source of free labor. You can make them do stuff. Once they get old enough, anyway. You can make them do stuff. And a kid doesn't have to be that old to take over some of the chores of working on the farm. So, if you want labor that you don't have to pay, and of course, assuming you're not practicing slavery or you can't afford slaves or whatever, if you want labor on your farm that you don't have to pay, in other words, if you want to get more output out of your farm without having to put more money into it, you need more kids. That's a great deal if you're not the one having the kids. For the guy, that sounds like a perfect solution. Let's just have more kids, more labor for the farm. We'll get more yield. We'll be richer. For the person who's undergoing the serious and incredibly real physical danger of gestating and bearing a child, that does not sound like a good frigging deal. That sounds like an incredibly dangerous, unpleasant deal. So, yeah, you've got a disagreement. Women would not want to just keep popping out as many kids as possible on the whole, and men would like to maximize the number of children that they can get to increase the amount of wealth they can extract from farming. How do you resolve this? Well, you resolve this by the fact that one of the two sexes, biological sexes, is much larger and stronger physically than the other one on average. And it's like a line from True Detective. One of the characters in the first season, I think, one of the characters was played by Rachel McAdams, and one of the police characters, and she mentioned to her partner that she always carry a knife on her. And he said, "Why do you always carry a knife on you?" And she says, "Because one of the two sexes can kill the other one with their bare hands." It's grim, but it's true. So you get patriarchy. Agriculture brings patriarchy. Agriculture brings the institutionalization of men's power over women. Why? To control their reproductive capacity. Why would they want control of that? Wealth. That's it. The free labor that can produce more wealth from agriculture. That's a full circle. Agriculture brings patriarchy. Why does the patriarchy want control over women? Why do you want that? Because you're using agriculture and it's directly beneficial to the men. Sucks, but it's very real. So with agriculture, what you get is, on the one hand, it's more secure. The food sources are more secure. The population can grow faster. You can spend your time around lots of different people and not just the same 20 people. There's decorative arts, pottery, weaving, dyeing of clothing, all kinds of things. You can be inside a nice, secure house when it rains. Hallelujah. You can have reserves of food, so if you don't have to worry about every single day finding food. You can have neat stuff, but you're also getting agriculture. You're also getting patriarchy. You're getting new diseases. Why new diseases? Because you got a bunch of people living in close proximity for the first time in history. Disease loves that. You got humans living in close proximity to animals for long periods of time for the first time in history. Disease loves that. You got violence and warfare. Hunter-gatherers, like I said, they don't really make war on each other. That's one thing we know both from the archaeological record and modern hunter-gatherer tribes. They have ritualized combats and threat displays and things like that, but there's just not enough of them, and they don't have a sophisticated enough technology to make war. But agricultural societies have resources. They have professional soldiers, they have well-designed weapons, and they have something worth making war over: stores of food and stuff. So we get warfare with agriculture. Yay, thrilling. Okay. But that still doesn't get us to writing. Agriculture 10,000 years ago. Writing only about 5,000 years ago. What's the magic ingredient? The magic ingredient is bronze. So, About 10,000 years ago, we are in what's called the Neolithic era, the New Stone era. Humans and human-like creatures have been using stones as tools in some capacity since way back. But around 10,000 years ago, the stone technology, if you will, was getting very advanced. They were getting very good at shaping stones into extremely useful and complicated tools. They started to use copper for some things because they were able to extract it from the ground. But copper is a fairly soft metal. It's very common, or relatively common. Not as common as iron, but we'll get to that. Iron was everywhere, but it was too hard to work with at this point in history. They couldn't do anything with it. They started to use copper for some stuff, especially like cutting surfaces. But generally speaking, they were mostly still using stone tools and things like that. The real breakthrough came around 5,000 years ago at the beginning of the Bronze Age. That's why we call it the Bronze Age. We call it the Bronze Age because this is when they started using bronze tools and weapons, not because they came in third. The Bronze Age, at the beginning of the Bronze Age, they start developing techniques. Humans start developing techniques for taking copper and mixing it with tin, in a ratio of 9 parts copper to 1 part tin, and they smelt it, and it becomes bronze, which is harder than copper. It's metallic. It's not as good as iron, but it's very much better than stone. It can be shaped. It holds an edge better. It's much more durable, and you can make armor out of it. There's no real way to make armor out of stone, but copper, yeah, you can make like a helmet. You can make like a breastplate. You can make stuff to put over your arms and your legs. You can do all kinds of stuff with it. So the thing is, if you've got so imagine there's farmers, there's agricultural societies. And one of those agricultural societies figures out how to use bronze, and the other one doesn't. You got an agricultural society that, yeah, it can make cool tools, it can make neat tools, but the main thing it can make, for our purposes, is weapons. Weapons that are sharper, that can be made faster than stone weapons. They're sharper than stone weapons. They last longer than stone weapons. And they can make armor. Armor that a stone spear just has no hope of penetrating. What is that society that has access to bronze gonna do? Well, humans being humans, it's going to conquer the shit out of everybody around them who doesn't have as much access to bronze. Which means that for the first time in history, you've got massive agricultural efforts directed towards a small group of people who are in charge. Remember, you had agricultural societies for thousands of years, but because they were using stone, and particularly stone weapons, they could only grow so large, and they did not have the ability to effectively dominate other nearby agricultural societies. They could make war on each other and take some of their stuff, but they couldn't just control them. They couldn't just conquer them and rule them. But now, with bronze, they can. And the ones who have the bronze are going to conquer and consolidate lots of individual agricultural societies together into larger ones. Which means massive amounts of agricultural product being controlled centrally from by one group of people. They need to keep track of more agricultural product at once than any stone tool and stone weapon using agricultural society ever did. How do they do it? Well, they start off by inventing little marks on clay tablets to keep track of stuff like bushels of grain and heads of cattle. They quickly make the system more sophisticated to convey more information, and it develops ultimately into writing, a very complicated system of notation that can communicate entire thoughts and ideas, and that's the ballgame. Writing comes out of agriculture, but not just agriculture, because we had agriculture for thousands of years before writing comes along. The thing that was missing was bronze, because bronze let jerks who had bronze conquer large groups of people to consolidate their agricultural production at a scale previously unimagined. And when you get that scale and that level of agricultural production, you need new tools to manage it. And the new tool that got invented was writing. So, we have come all the way from hunting and gathering to agriculture with stone tools and weapons, to agriculture with bronze tools and weapons, and then after the bronze tool and weapon using jerks conquer a bunch of people and consolidate them, writing. The development of that key thing that's going to give us insight, direct insight, into what these people were thinking and feeling. Before writing, we call it prehistory. It's still stuff. If you think of history as what happened before now, that doesn't even make sense. What is prehistory? But history often refers to recorded history. In other words, the period of time before now when they had writing. And in that case, prehistory as a term makes sense. There was a bunch of stuff that happened, but we have only a dim window on it, because nobody could write anything down and tell us about it. But about 5,000 years ago, when they developed writing, because they had conquered so many people and appropriated so much of their agricultural productive capacity that they needed to develop something to keep track of it all, when they developed writing about 5,000 years ago, we suddenly, it's still stuff that happened before now, but it's stuff that they could comment on directly, and we can read their comments. And suddenly we have a better insight into it. So that's what we're going to be doing this semester. We're going to be looking at that time period. And not even all of that time period, just some of it. Because even just 5,000 years of history for the whole world is huge. It's huge. It's a lot. It's too much. I can't do that in 16 weeks. The best I can do is pick and choose little pieces of it to sort of illustrate what was going on in some parts of the world as a representative example in a way that forms a narrative that is interesting and informative. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing a small sliver of 5,000 years of human history from the period when there was writing, because we want to be able to take a look inside the brains of the people who were there. Okay. All right. That's it. That's the lecture. I usually write a bunch of stuff on the board, but we're doing this by video, so you may need to rewatch this more than once. I take pity on your souls. Do your thing. I'll see you next week. I look forward to it, even though this is a sight unseen kind of thing, like a grab bag, like you don't know what you're getting. No, I'm sure you're all wonderful. All right, I'll see you next week. Take care and have a good weekend. Bye.